Hi guys, welcome to today's video. It is time to talk about my favorite books of 2024. I did do a video halfway through the year about all of my favorite books so far in the year. A lot of those will be in this video, so if you hear me repeating myself, I apologize, but we do have some others to talk about. Well, we have 8 books, 8 solo books to talk about, and then we have a series to talk about. We should just get into it. I'm going to start from the bottom up. The first 4 books I have here to talk about, I gave a rating of 4.5 stars. So I feel like we should start with them. I will say this year I was very strict with my ratings. I didn't rate many books 5 stars, but I also didn't really have that 5-star feeling with a lot of books. I think I rated 4 books 5 stars in total this year, which is a lot lower than last year. Hopefully next year I get a lot more 5-star reads, but I did read a lot of books I loved this year and other books I just really liked, so it was overall a good rating. But we won't get into all of that. We'll get into that in my video where I talk about every book I read this year. But let's just get into my favorite books of 2024. Oh, I will say, sorry if you hear like screaming. I think the neighbors are having a party because it is like New Year's Day and I think they have a drunken castle. Sorry if you hear a lot of commotion. So firstly, we have Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. This is literary fiction. It's a bit of a weirder story. I really wanted to read more weird books this year. I didn't read a lot, but this is one of them. I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about it, but basically we're following Rory and she gets bitten by a werewolf, so she then transforms into a werewolf, and it's very gruesome and gross the way it's described. I'm not a big fan of those things, but for some reason I could deal with it in this book, and the story overall was really interesting. This character had very complicated relationships in her life, specifically with her mother. She was also dealing a lot with her sister. She moved in with her sister at the time. She had a new romantic relationship happening. There was a lot going on, and also with this new change in her life where she's now a werewolf, that affects a lot. So it was very interesting to explore her life and everything she went through. There was a bit of drama, but overall I really enjoyed the story and I really like how it ended. I did really like the romance subplot. I feel like I wouldn't have read it as quickly if there wasn't a romance subplot, which is a little annoying. I feel like I always have to have romance in my books, but I did enjoy it. I did like a lot of lines in this book as well. I did annotate a bit, which I wasn't expecting, and I underlined quite a bit. There was a lot I could relate to, the things Rory experienced and the way she described things, and the way things she was going through as a werewolf kind of related to like the human experience and things I could relate to. I found really interesting, and overall I really liked how this book was written, and just the story overall I really liked and found really interesting. So I highly recommend this book. This is definitely a book I'll remember. This is the only literary fiction book on this list, but I also think I didn't really read much literary fiction this year. But anywho, I really enjoyed it and I highly recommend it. We then have Caught Up by Liz Tumford. So this is a baseball romance, a very popular romance series. It's the 3rd book in the Windy City series, and I really enjoyed it, obviously. Firstly, I knew going into this book I would really like it because it does have the single dad and nanny trope, which I'll say a million times. I love that trope so much. I love kids in books. I love that dynamic. So I knew I was going to really like it, and I had read The Right Move beforehand and really liked that book. So I knew going into it that I would really like it, and I ended up liking it more than The Right Move. But my rating did dwindle towards the end because I felt like it dragged on for too long. It is about like 430 pages, which is just too long for me for a romance book. And so I was loving this book. It was like a 4.75, but as it just dragged on for too long, it kind of lost my interest. I was still loving the story, but it was just dragging on, like I said, and I just wasn't in it anymore. I mean, I feel like I would have loved it so much more if it was shorter. Even like maybe 50-70 pages shorter, but I should say I still really enjoyed this book and loved the relationship and the characters, and I still think about it all the time. The child in this book was adorable. He was a really young, like a baby, and I forgot that before going into it. Usually the children in books are a little older, maybe like 5 or older, so they can talk and stuff, but he was a baby and he was so cute. Oh, I just really liked it. I don't know how many times I'm going to say the same thing, but I really enjoyed it. We then have Terms and Conditions by Lauren Asher. So this is part of the Dreamland Billionaires series. I read the fine print and I didn't love it, but I do want to continue on with the series. So I read Terms and Conditions at the start of the year in January, and I really liked it. The male main character, Declan, is extremely grumpy, one of the grumpiest male main characters I've read, but that didn't deter me with this book. If he was acting like how he acted in this book in real life, like I experienced that firsthand, I would not talk to him. But in a book setting, I was okay with it. And then every time he did do something sweet, it meant so much more because he's such a grumpy character. And I also loved Iris. She brought my love for plants. She is like a big plant lover. There's literally a greenhouse in this book. And because of her, I got a bunch of plants. I will say they are all dead now because winter killed them. But I do have some more plant stuff from Christmas. We're going to try and bring plants back into my life. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It was such a cute read. Iris works for Declan in this book, so she's like his assistant, and they have a very close relationship. Well, they're not very close, but it's like the closest relationship Declan has in his life. And it kind of takes him a while to realize that he's been taking her for granted and he hasn't been treating her very well. He becomes a nicer character. He kind of changes his ways a little, and it's very endearing and heartwarming to see. And I did like seeing Iris like kind of fight back and not put up with everything Declan did and stuff. Very, very, very sweet book. We then have Final Offer by Lauren Asher. So this is the third and final book in the series. I rated this a 4.75. So I think I mentioned the first 4 books were 4.5. I was wrong because this book I did rate a 4.5, but when I was putting together this list, I realized I rated them the same, but I enjoyed this book more, so I increased the rating to a 4.75. So I read this later in the year. It took me a long time to read because it's such a big book and it has the second chance trope, which I'm not a big fan of, but I feel like I'm changing my mind on that because I have read a few second chance romance books here and there lately that I've really enjoyed, so I feel like I might need to change my stance on not liking second chance romance books. But yeah, I obviously really, really, really enjoyed this book. It wasn't a 5-star, it didn't have those 5-star feelings, but I loved it so much. It was so heartwarming and emotional. This is a single mom trope, and we do have a little girl in this book that is so, so cute, of course. I loved both of the characters. I loved Cal. He struggled with a few addictions, I think mostly alcohol, and so it was a lot to read about, but I feel like Lauren Asher kind of discussed what he went through really well. Like, Callahan did things that were obviously wrong and he shouldn't have done, and you didn't like excuse his behavior, but you like understood it and you wanted him to get better while reading the book. And Alana also didn't like put up with it. Obviously, she held him accountable and made sure like he was getting better and doing better himself before she like committed to anything. And I think overall their love was really, really strong, and their love is what helped Callahan get better, but also like himself wanting to be better. And also his relationship with Alana's child, Cammy, was so sweet. And also seeing flashbacks from like their childhood and everything, it was very, very sweet. It was a very like up and down with everything going on because addiction isn't very like easy obviously to get over, so there were a lot of hurdles and stuff. But yeah, it was so, so, so sweet. Also very emotional. I'm saying the same words over and over and over again, but that's just because I mean them so much. So yeah, I think I almost cried reading this book, but I felt so close to the characters. This is also another book I think about all the time. I picture this world all the time. There's literally like a dinner scene in this book I was thinking about the other day for some reason. I don't know why, but I'm very glad I finally picked this book up and I really enjoyed it. We then have Kingdom of the Wicked, which I have spoken a bit about this book on my channel. So this is the first book in the Kingdom of the Wicked series. I've read the second book now and I still need to read the third and final book. But I started this series I think halfway through the year and I flew through this book. I read it in a 24-hour readathon and I absolutely loved it. I gave it a 4.75. It was almost a 5 stars, but just not quite. I also don't usually rate the first book in a series, in a fantasy series, of 5 stars because I haven't seen the whole thing. But I really enjoyed the first book, like I said. I also enjoyed the second book, not as much, but I'm really excited to continue the series. But this is a YA romance, fantasy romance. The other books in the series are more new adult and adult. I loved the journey we went on in this book. I loved following our character, Amelia. She's a witch and something happens to her sister, so she wants to avenge her sister, and so she summons one of the wicked princes of hell, who happens to be Wrath, who is so delicious. Ew. I wish I didn't say that. But I love Wrath. I love him so much. The things he says. And I love him. He has me giggling. And I also love Amelia. She's trying to be a really strong character. I think she is, but she obviously falls short sometimes. She messes things up. She gets emotional. She's human. She's also very, very young. I think she's like 17 or 18. So she goes through a lot and I feel for her, but I also love her determination. And it was a great start to the series, a really, really good start to the series. And like I said, I did really enjoy the second book. So we gotta finish the third book and finish the series soon because I've loved this series so far and I knew I was gonna love it and I was right. So I feel great. I feel great about myself. And this book is also signed, which I didn't know. I think it's digitally signed, but I picked it up at a book fair secondhand. When I started the book, I was like, oh, it's signed. Wow. My first ever signed book. Happens to be one of my favorite books. But anywho, yeah, I highly recommend this series. It felt very similar to like The Cruel Prince. Not as in like what happens, but the feeling I had while reading it. It feels like one of those OG series that just have those really good feelings, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I highly recommend this series. We then have An Education in Malice. This is my first 5-star read I'm talking about in this video. This is by Gibson. This is the first book I've ever read by her, and I was really, really, really excited for this book because it's a Camilla retelling. Camilla is a classic. It's the first vampire story ever written, and it is one of my favorite books. One of the first, is it the first classic I read? I think so. I absolutely love that book. It's such an easy classic to read as well. I really, really enjoyed it. And so hearing this was a retelling of Camilla, I was so excited. Also because I read Camilla quite a while ago and I really wanted to get into the story. And I'd been looking at retellings and stuff, but none really spoke to me. And hearing this was a retelling, I was like, this is perfect. It's dark academia. It's set, when is it set? Like the 1700s, 1800s. We're following two characters at a school. Camilla, obviously, and Laura. There's a sapphic romance, there's vampires, there's a suspicious professor, one I did not like at all, but it also had beautiful, beautiful, beautiful writing. I tabbed so much and underlined so much. Literally underlined pretty much every single page. The writing was so beautiful. I need to go back and have a look at some of these quotes and maybe like tattoo one or something because the writing was absolutely beautiful. These characters were also super young. I think they're in like college. Yeah, they are in college. I don't know how old they were, but they were pretty young. And they were obviously going through a lot. They had a big infatuation with each other. It was a big whirlwind. There's stuff going on in this book. It is dark academia. You can expect that. They were also academical rivals. They were both like the best in their class at poetry. So you can expect a lot of like beautiful poetry and stuff. Which honestly wasn't the favorite part of this book. I think I'm just not a big fan of poetry, but the writing overall I highly, highly loved and enjoyed, and I always recommend this book, and I'm planning to read more books by this author next year. So I also think this was an amazing Camilla retelling. I think it was done really well. I couldn't have asked for anything more, to be honest. We then have Fangirl Down by Tessa Bailey. So this is a golf romance. Never read a golf romance before this book. I thought I would like this book, but I wasn't too sure, and I ended up loving it. This is also obviously a 5 stars. I read it so quickly and I was just so happy reading this book. I was giggling the whole time, smiling, kicking my feet, everything while reading this book. I was so happy reading it. I have a vlog of me reading both of these books. Yeah, I had the best time reading this book, and I've seen a lot of people not like this book, call it cringy and stuff, which I understand. I didn't feel that while reading it, but obviously everyone feels differently about certain books, but I really, 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 really liked it and loved the characters. It was just overall so sweet and endearing, and it just so sweet. The romance was so good. But basically, Wells, who is the male main character, is like a professional golf player, and then Josephine is his like #1 fan. She's always been there for him, always watching his games, and then things kind of go downhill for Wells' career, so he's kind of at the last straw, and then Josephine and Wells kind of work together to get his career back, and a lot of things go down. So yeah, I just really, really loved this book. Up to this book, I think almost every book I read by Tessa Bailey I'd rated a 5 stars, and then I read the next book in this series, which was horrible. I will say it was terrible. I did not like it whatsoever, the Au Pair Affair. I won't talk about it because I talk about it too much, but that book was terrible. And so that was like the biggest disappointment of the year, but I am planning to read the third book. We'll see how I feel about that one. But anywho, we then have Check and Mate by Ali Hazelwood. Like I've said a million times, Ali Hazelwood is my favorite author, but I was hesitant reading this book because beforehand I'd only read her adult STEM romances, and this is a YA romance, which I don't typically read a lot. And it's also centered around chess, which I wasn't worried too much about that aspect because I do like chess media, like movies or books about chess, and I knew Ali Hazelwood was going to do a good job. I also heard amazing things about this book, so I finally picked it up this year and I loved it. Look at all of the tabs. I annotated so much. I really enjoyed it. I feel like she did YA so well, and it didn't feel too young. The characters I think were 18 and 21, which is basically like my age, and it didn't feel too young. I feel like some YA feels really young, but it definitely didn't feel that way, and I just overall really enjoyed it. I love Ali Hazelwood's humor. She always has me laughing. Her romance as well is so sweet. It was just everything I wanted. It was really nice to have something different. I will say I have read her other two releases and did not like them as much, which has made me a little sad. But she still stands as one of my favorite authors, so I really enjoyed this book. I feel like I don't need to talk too much about it because everyone has probably read this book or heard about it, but we are following two chess rivals. So Nolan, oh, there's a mosquito on me. Nolan is the best chess player in the world or something, and then Mallory comes along and I think she does like a chess tournament for fun, and then she wins the tournament, and then Nolan's like, who is this girl? I want to know her. And so he becomes kind of like, not obsessed, that's a little strong, but he like really likes her, and he's never felt that way about someone else before, which is an Ali Hazelwood man if he's never felt that way about a girl before, and then suddenly he's like obsessed with them, you know. My camera's gonna die. So it was like a typical Ali Hazelwood romance, which I love, so I highly recommend it, of course. We now have this series, which is going to be a little confusing, but we shall get into it. So, I read the Villains and Virtues series this year, which I've talked about so much, but it is my favourite series of the year, and I loved every book in the series. So there are 5 books in the series, but the first 3 books are like the completed series, and then the following 2 books are like extra books you can read if you like, and they follow like side characters. So I read the first book, Thrown in the Dark, gave it a 4.75 stars, absolutely loved it, one of my favourite books. I then read Summoned to the Wilds, 4.5, also loved it. I then read Eclipse of the Crown, the third book, 4.75 stars, absolutely loved it. Eclipse of the Crown is the only physical copy I have, and I do really want to get all the other books. I loved this series, of course, like I just said, and I would die to have all of the books, so I need to get them. And the covers are also so beautiful. I love these characters, I love the world. And then moving on to the 2 following books, we then have Bound to Fall, which is a 5-star read and my favourite book of the year. But to say that I loved that book is an understatement. It is a 6-star read. It is my favourite book of the year. It was so good. It followed these side characters that I didn't even think secondly about. Like, I didn't even think about them getting a romance. I didn't even think I didn't even think about them, and then I read this book and I loved them so much, and the romance was so good. It was so good. I don't know what A.K. Gugino puts in her books, but she put something in them because it was so good. I never stopped recommending this series, and I always say that it is a little hard to get into when you first start it, but just keep pushing through. If I can get through it, then you can, okay? Because, and that's also to say, oh, it starts off bad and then it gets better. No, it starts off good, but it's just a little hard to understand. But then it makes more sense as you go on, and you will love the story. So I recommend it so much. It needs to be talked about so much more. But yeah, moving on from the 4th book, I then read Bound and Tied, which was the last book in the series. I gave it a 4.5 stars. Also amazing. It had like a redemption arc for a character, which was really fun. So I won't talk too much about the series. It is a fantasy romance. The main 3 books were following Damien and Arma. Damien is a villain. He's a bad guy who like kind of kidnaps Arma, who is the sweetest character I've ever read. Actually, Bound to Fall, or Celeste, is also one of the sweetest characters I've ever read. So I just love their character so much. Obviously loved Damien. He was so sweet. after you get past his like villain side. He is such a sweet character, and the adventures they go on are so fun and interesting. The magic system is so interesting. They cover so much world in these books, and all the journeys they go on and all the people and the creatures they come across are so fun and just funny. Like, I laughed so much reading these books. Oh, so good. Highly recommend this series as always. But those are all of my favorite books of 2024. If you take anything from this video, it would be to read one of these books at least, because they are all books that I love so much. And when people read books that I love, it makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. So I hope you guys pick up one of these books, or at least put them on your TBR. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I think this is the first video that'll be up of the new year, so happy new year. I hope you guys had a good 2024, and I hope to see you guys a lot this year in my videos. But yeah, I'm very excited to see how this year goes, what videos I'm gonna post, how my channel grows. But yeah, thank you so much for always being here and for watching my videos. I really appreciate it. Bye.